So I know I told you I would make a carburetor clean video. So that's what this is going to be. It's really not my forte, making videos. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm going to show you two things. I'm going to show you how to get the carburetors off the bike. And I'm going to show you how to do a maintenance clean. So we'll kind of keep this short. Alright, so to get this tank off, there's three things we have to do. Probably the most obvious one is we have to drain the fuel that's out. My tank, I think, is probably 3/4 full of stale gas. The second one is we have to disconnect the hoses and remove the petcock. And then the third, we get to remove the mounting points. So I'm going to switch over to my phone video and I'll show you how to do that. And then once we get these off, I'll show you how to get the carburetors out. This is the view of the underside of the tank. That's the fuel valve, petcock, whatever you want to call it. So the first thing we got to do is get the fuel out. This has two connections, right? So this bottom one that you can't see because my hand is in the way is for the vacuum. And this top one is fuel out. So the fuel flows from the tank through the valve and out down the hose. To drain this thing, if we put a spare hose onto the outlet here and turn this to prime, the fuel will drain down through and we can put it in a gas can. So that's the first thing we're going to do. Start by laying down a rag because, well, you know, fuel goes everywhere. And I'm going to put on some gloves because I absolutely hate the smell of gasoline. So be right back. Yeah, so you can see mine leaked just a little bit of fuel. That's probably what's hanging out in the fuel filter there. And it actually doesn't smell that bad, but I'm going to drain it anyway. It's starting to get that black licorice smell. So I pulled that off, and petcock is still in the on position. And I've let that rag there just kind of catch the drips. But I'm going to put on this hose and run it into that gas can. And then we'll rotate this to prime, and that'll let the fuel drain. Okay, so I've got the spare fuel hose, the length of fuel hose attached to the fuel valve. Let's stick it in this gas can, and then when I turn it to prime here, fuel should start flowing out. We'll see. Oh yeah, I got a nice steady drip. So I'm gonna let that drain. It'll probably take 5 minutes or so, so sit tight. I suppose I should also mention that the reason we're draining this tank is I have, unfortunately in the past, pulled these off with fuel in the tank, laid them on their side, and the gasoline has dripped out through the fill hole and ruined the paint. So it's easier now to just drain the tank and get it out of the way than it is to try and lever a full fuel tank around. So if you want to know why I'm taking the time to do that, that's why. If you have, you know, just a few gallons, less than half, you're probably fine not draining the tank. And when I pull this off, I'll show you how to support it. So, you know, we'll let this drain. Alright, so mine is about drained. I had, I don't know, maybe a gallon left in it. So now that that's done, turn the petcock back to the on position, and that'll stop any fuel that's remaining in there from dripping all over the engine. And then you can pull off the fuel hose. A little bit difficult to do with one hand. Oh, come off there. All right. Just kind of let that be down in the gas can there, so it leaves you alone. So that hose is off. That's the fuel hose. And now we've got to remove, I'm going to leave that rag there. Now that the fuel line is disconnected, we'll have to remove the vacuum line. And this is the vacuum line that actuates the pump. That comes off the #1 cylinder there. So that's off, that's off. That should be, the hose is disconnected. Before the tank will come up, we have to remove the handle. I'm not going to turn that. It's held in place with a screw down in the middle there. So I don't have the screwdriver with me. I'm going to grab it and I'll show you how to get that off. Okay, so to get this handle off the valve, there's a screw that holds it in place right in the center there. Take a Phillips head screwdriver. This is actually a JIS screwdriver. Right, we'll need this later, but Phillips head will work. Back out that screw in the middle until it's loose, and then pull the handle off. It should come off pretty easily. The screw will fall right out if you tip it, so be careful not to lose that. And that, you've disconnected 2 hoses. You removed the handle. So that should be everything you need to do there to get the tank up. And then the fuel tank is held in place with 2 screws, or 2 bolts. One at the front and one hidden inside the seat latch. And my bike, again, it's not stock, so your seat latch will probably look different. And I'm not entirely certain what size of bolt you'll have there. For me, that's an M6 socket cap screw, and then I've got an 8mm bolt up front. But we'll remove those 2, and then you should be able to lift the tank up. Alright, so I've removed those, removed the front and the rear mounts. And now the fuel tank is free. I can lift it up and get it off the bike. Before I do that though, there's 2 things you want to watch out for. One, there's these little rubber blocks. And sometimes I've seen them here and sometimes I've seen them here. But these will fall down in and disappear. So when you lift up on the tank, keep an eye on those. And the other is there's a fuel overflow drain hose down here. It just routes in behind the swing arm. But when you lift up on the tank, it'll feel like it's grabbing a hold of something. So you just look out for that. It's not attached to anything. It should just pull straight up. So that's my tank. I pulled it off. I've put in a piece of cardboard here. That way if it leaks a little fuel, it's not a big deal. The big important thing, or the important thing here, is to keep it level. You want to lean to one side simply because that fuel valve is off center. If it leans that one side, it can leak out the cap and destroy your paint. So pull it off and set it on something like a piece of cardboard here that will absorb any fuel. And then you should have something that looks like this. The tank is completely removed, so now we can go after the carburetors. Alright, so fuel tank is removed. To get the airbox off now, it's held in place with 1 bolt right at the front. This is just behind the bolt that's holding the fuel tank on. And then the airbox is actually secured to each carb with one of these little screws. Sometimes they're kind of hard to see, but there's one for each carburetor. And then the other thing, I guess, is there's a vacuum hose, but it's not really a vacuum hose. This is a vent or a drain line that will drain the airbox if water gets into it. So you got to pull that off, and then we'll go after these screws, undo the bracket there, and then this should just lift off. I've got the front mount bracket, or front mounting point, loosened on the airbox. I have also disconnected the drain hose. Now if you forget to do this, when you lift up on the airbox, it'll remind you. And now I'm going to remove the screws here that hold the airbox actually to the carburetors. Like I mentioned, they're 4, and you can see they're in there kind of at odd angles. To get at these, this is where that fancy Japanese screwdriver comes in. So you see on this screw here, bear with me, on this screw here, I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little focus. There we go, there's a little dot. That little dot right there indicates that that is a JIS screw and not a Phillips head. So you can put a Phillips head screwdriver in this. Sometimes it works, a lot of times it rounds them out. But if you get the right screwdriver, then this goes pretty well. So I'm going to take this now. I'm going to remove or loosen the clamps on all 4 carbs, and then I can I'll lift the airbox off and show you what you have. I should also mention that if you're having trouble accessing the head screws for these inner 2 carbs, these hoses here are just vent tubes for the bowls. You can sort of push them down and they'll get out of the way. They're just sitting up into the airbox there. So once you do that, you can move them aside and actually get to those inner screws. Here, it doesn't look like I actually have a hose clamp for this breather, so Your bike may be different. I actually think I did have one at one point in time and I just didn't put it back on. You can actually see the indentation. So since I don't have one, that thing just pops right off. If you've got one, loosen the clamp and pop it off. And I've gotten these loose, so now the airbox should come up. I mean, effectively, once you've done that, if you grab a hold of it and lever it up, it'll come free. Mine's kind of grungy, but that's what the airbox looks like. And now we've actually got access to our carbs. Dear God, I gotta wash this bike. Look at that. So now we have the airbox off. To get these carburetors free, you have to, effectively disconnect the fuel line, remove or loosen this nut, disconnect the throttle cables, and then actually loosen the clamps similarly to the airbox. And you can lever the carburetors free. So I'm going to start and remove these throttle cables. And the way they come out is you use a wrench to loosen this one to back this off, and it's slotted in there. And hopefully I can show you this. Focus. It's slotted in there, so when you loosen that, you can lever it out. And then rotate the butterfly around, and that will give you slack to loosen this one. Now that upper one is held in place with this irritating little retainer clip. You can try and get it free, but what I ultimately do is just take the screw loose. That screw can be a real bear, but if you loosen that nut and you remove that screw, chances are good you'll be able to get the throttle cable free. So I'm going to do that first, and then I'll show you how to do the rest of it. So I got you on the other camera, just from a slightly different angle here. So this is these are the throttle cables, and the top one here just fits in and is held in place by that retaining mechanism. And the bottom one is held in place with a nut. And this is actually what you would do if you needed to adjust your throttle cable. So to get that off of there, I'm going to take a 10mm wrench and just loosen this up. And once I have that free, back it off a bit. Yep, a little bit more. It's not a lot of room to work for big hands. Back that off. Now you can see it's loose. It'll flop and you can slide it out of the way. Now to get that top one off, I usually just take the screwdriver and remove that screw, because that retaining clip can be a real bear. You probably can't see anything with my big hands in the way. Now, that screw is often in there quite tight. Sometimes you round it off, and if that happens, then you have to tackle prying this free. But I got lucky. So, take that screw out. Let's see if I can do this without dropping it in the engine. Now that that's free, you can grab this little retainer, and don't lose this thing, because it's not available anymore. So if you lose it, you're kind of hosed. And now you've got both cables loose, but to actually get them off the bike, you have to rotate the butterflies around so that let's see if I can. Well, anyway, I'll get you on the other camera. So both these cables are loose now. I've removed that nut and I removed the retainer here. You can see down inside there, focus, that the cable fits into the butterfly through that little slot. So the way to get this out is with a little bit of patience, work the housing in until you can get the cable to align with that slot, and then it'll pull out. Now I know that looked easy. When you actually do it, you'll be frustrated with it. I was frustrated with it the first few times I did it. So now you've got the upper one done, you can do the same thing. Grab a hold of the butterfly and roll it around, or the butterfly, grab a hold of the throttle and roll it around so you can get to that lower one. And it comes free the same way. Once you get that done, you can pull both cables out of the way. The throttle cables are off. Now we're going to go ahead and remove this clamp, pull off the fuel supply line. It's going to leak a little bit. Just make sure you got a rag down there. And then, once that's free, we'll remove the clamps. There's 2 per carburetor. So we'll do that next. I'm going to do this, and then I'll get the screwdriver and take these loose, and then I'll show you how to lever these carburetors actually off the engine. Alright, one thing I should mention, I've got the clamp off there now, is when you pull this hose off, be really careful with this plastic nipple. It's fragile, you know, because they're 30 years old and there's a lot of heat down here. But more to that point, they're not available any longer, as far as I know. So if you break one, chances are good you'll actually have to buy a used carburetor set just to steal it from. So be super careful when you pull this hose off. If you're having a fight with it, cut the hose, pull it off, and replace the hose. Hose is a lot cheaper, a lot more readily available than that nipple is. So the fuel supply is disconnected, the throttle cables are disconnected, and I have loosened these clamps. So now the way to get this actually off is they fit pretty tightly in those intake manifold boots, but I just grab a hold of them and pivot it with my body weight. And usually if you just push sort of downward in this direction, it'll pop free. Then you can lift the carburetors actually out of the bike. A couple things to be careful with is, one, the enrichment knob sits here and it sticks out. You know, it'll hit the frame if you pull straight up. So you kind of have to lift the carbs from this side up first. And if you hold them at the angle they're at now, they won't dump fuel. But if you let them turn in this direction, you know, so that the fuel gets through the vents, then it'll dump gasoline all over you. So once you pop them free, slightly lever it this end first to get it up, and then hold them at this same level so that you don't spill fuel. All right, so I pulled my carburetors off. It actually brought two of the intake boots with it, but I haven't tipped them, so the bowls are still full of fuel. The way I do this is make sure that your float vents are kind of pointed up, and then just pivot it and let the fuel drip out. It'll drip out of those float vents and catch it in an oil pan or something else. This is my grimy transmission oil pan. But keep tipping it, moving it around until all the fuel drains out of the carburetors. I've got the carburetors off the bike now, and I've drained out as much of the fuel as I can. I also think I lost that piece of fuel hose. Oh, nope, I found it. Here it is. Don't lose these. So now I'll show you how to tear these apart. They're a lot easier than they look. Not nearly as intimidating as getting them off the bike. So I'll show you that, but I'm going to do that in another video. It's like 1 in the morning and I'm pretty tired, so I don't want to dig into a pair of carburetors without fresh eyes. But part 1, show you how to get them off the bike. In part 2, I'll show you to take them apart and clean them. And then, I don't know, maybe we'll do a part 3 where I show you how to put them back on the bike. I could pull the old Haynes manual and say installation is the reverse of removal, but getting those throttle cables on is pretty tricky. So we'll show you that. But anyway, carbs are off the bike now. In the next installment I will show you how to clean them, and yeah, hopefully all is going well.